Good Wednesday morning. Welcome to Begin in the Word. Today we'll be continuing our study in the book of Titus, looking at Titus chapter 2, verses 6 through 8. Likewise, exhort the young men to be sober-minded, in all things showing yourself to be a pattern of good works, in doctrine showing integrity, reverence, incorruptibility, sound speech that cannot be condemned, that he who is an opponent may be ashamed, having nothing evil to say of you. Today we're continuing through the section in Titus 2. We've been going through this series where we look at various roles in the Christian community, that Titus has been instructed to teach sound doctrine that leads to faith and good works over against his opponents on the island of Crete. And here specifically, he's addressing various roles within the Christian community. He started here with older men, and then with older women, and then he moves to younger women. And then ultimately, younger men in this text today, completing that obvious cycle. And within this cycle here to younger men, there's some obvious instructions to Titus. So here we see, likewise, exhort. That means to encourage, to call people to challenge. Not necessarily a rebuke or an admonishment even, but it means to call people to cheer them towards a very encouraging description of getting people to do this thing. You encourage young men to be sober-minded. And then after this, Paul's going to transition to advice that's actually for Titus. Notice here as Paul writes to Titus, he says, yourself. Here yourself refers to the recipient of the letter, Titus. The sober-mindedness we talk about here refers to self-control. To not be ruled by your biology, by your passions, but to be able to think clearly about your decisions. You're not just governed by impulses or even emotions, but you can put those things aside and think critically about a situation to come to the right decision, a good decision, not just what may feel impulsive at the time. You know, to me, as we mentioned here, after this point right here, this transition to instructions to Titus, and so it's kind of humorous to me that there's one thing on this list for young men. Every other group gets 5, 6, 7 instructions. Young men get 1. But indeed, perhaps this is the overarching challenge for young men, because there's a lot of things young men struggle with, but this is at the heart of every single one of them. A young man can learn to have self-control. Most of his battle is over. Basically, in every place where young men end up overcome and cause problems for themselves, even long-term problems for themselves, it comes back to self-control, whether that's speech, alcohol consumption, anger, watching television, watching sports, playing video games, sexual expression outside of marriage. These are all places where young men can really cause a mess for themselves. And these places and all the other places where they can cause a mess, being self-controlled will serve most of those ills. Learning to control yourself is the primary challenge towards young men. And so then we come to the rest of this advice, in all things, showing yourself. Titus is about to receive this. There's definite change, as we mentioned, in addressee at this point, and it's to Titus. Now, this kind of goes along with the hypothesis, I think it's pretty reasonable, of Titus, and the similarities to the letter to Timothy can lead us to believe that Titus himself was a reasonable young man. This advice is written to young men, and that just parallels to Titus, and then there's another item on the list that we'll look at next time. Leads us to believe Titus may have been a young man. Regardless, he's supposed to be sober-minded, and he's supposed to show these things, which obviously may be struggles that young men fight, and so this wisdom can apply to young men and to all of us as well. So what is Titus supposed to do in his work on the island of Crete? He's supposed to show something. He's supposed to demonstrate it. He's not just supposed to have all the answers in his head, but he's supposed to be a pattern of good works. And there's that word that you may be getting tired of again. Good works. Doing good things for other people. This is the essential theme of this letter, or at least one of the very top themes of this letter. Titus isn't just supposed to say, do good works. He's supposed to demonstrate it. It's supposed to be shown. It's supposed to be acted. He's supposed to have a lifestyle of doing good work so that others can see what it's like to build your life around doing good. He can't just be someone who shouts at people that they need to do good. He must show it. Furthermore, we see once again this connection of good works and doctrine. In doctrine, he's supposed to show several things. Doctrine, once again, refers to teaching. In particular, he's referring to, in doctrine, he's going to show the manner in which he teaches. This text, and perhaps the whole letter, refers to the content of the teaching. That needs to be good. It needs to be sound. However, I want to note that this passage specifically, when it refers to doctrine, is showing integrity, reverence, incorruptibility. This is not about the content of the message. This is about the conduct of the teacher. It's not about the content. It's about the conduct. Obviously, it needs to be true, but he wants to show that it's not just good enough to have the right answers, to have true doctrine. You need to show that and demonstrate that in the way that you teach. There have been times in my life that I thought having the truth and being right gave me a trump card that it didn't matter how I say it, and that's not true. Instead, Titus needs to teach. He needs to teach in a way that's consistent with the things he's doing. Moral lapses and failings will undermine his work faster than anything else. He needs to have integrity. He needs to not think that just because he's teaching, he gets to take shortcuts. He needs to have reverence and incorruptibility. He doesn't need anybody to be able to corrupt the message he's teaching. He needs to speak with integrity himself, but he can't be partial in saying one thing to one group and one thing to another. He needs to behave in a way that can be respectable. He can't be corrupted in his word to where he takes shortcuts with certain people and doesn't give them the full counsel of God. Instead, as he's making decisions, he may have to make various judgments. He needs to do that in a way that is fair and that doesn't fall prey to the whims and the wishes of other people who may try to leverage his power and his authority. Finally, he's given this phrase, sound speech, which goes back to this word sound again. Healthy, life-breathing, leads to growth and health and vitality. He can't say anything that's underhanded or duplicitous. The goal here is instead to disarm an opponent, that the opponent may be ashamed having nothing evil to say to you. That word may judge them, and it may cause them frustration. But it can't be that their offense is because we said something in the way we presented it. If they have right to look at us and say that our presentation was harmful in the way that we did it, and on the words that we say, our message they may consider harmful, and that's a judgment we can endure. But it can't be that we did it out of an unintegritous way or irreverent or with corruptibility. We can't do anything underhanded or duplicitous because we want to make sure we can disarm these opponents. He needs to behave in a way that is fair and that is gentle, as you read about in 2 Timothy chapter 2. But he also needs to behave in a way that has wisdom in it, to not cast his pearls before swine, as Jesus says in Matthew 7, because he may have to deal with an opponent, but he needs to make sure he doesn't put gas on the fire. He should speak the truth in a way that diffuses situation, instead of a pattern that causes people to become angrier and angrier and angrier because of his personal conduct. And so he himself needs to exercise self-control in the way that he teaches, as all young men need to, and all Christians showing themselves a pattern of good works. And so if you're in a position of leadership, I want to encourage you to adopt this pattern here, to recognize that you need to show yourself a pattern of good works, that you can't just teach and tell everybody what to do, but you need to live it. You need to be an example of it. And if you're a young man, I want to call you to self-control, to sober-mindedness. That sober-mindedness and self-control is not just something that you practice in one area of your life, but it's something that is part of your character. It's not as though you have self-control with your anger, but you don't have it with alcohol, or you have self-control with the way you spend your free time, but not with your sexual expression. No, self-control is a part of who you are. And if you want to be a young man that pleases God, learn to control yourself and to control your passions. Thank you for joining us today on Begin in the Word. It's our prayer that just as you've begun today in the Word of God, you'll live out today in the Word of God.